This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power, written and read for you by April Ames. If you haven't read the previous chapters, please click the link in the description or in the pinned comment. That will take you to the playlist. There you can start at Chapter 1 or pick up where you left off. Part 1. Shattered. Chapter 3. Brotherly Scorn. I woke up alone. The sun was shining through the windows, casting golden rays that streaked across my bed. The scent of fresh pineapple seeped in through the crack under the door, causing my belly to rumble. Bracing myself for incredible pain, I rolled off the bed and stood there, puzzled. My arms were no longer streaked with bright red, replaced instead by the pale pink of nearly healed wounds. I ran to the mirror to see the rest of me. It was the same all over. Every wound, including my back, had sealed shut and fused together overnight. My face, my poor face, was only a quarter as swollen as it had been. The cuts on my lips were completely healed without a trace. My eyes were no longer puffy slits, and my skin had gone from midnight blue to faintly green with healing. Even the jagged gash across my throat was not so starkly visible. I could just about pass for not hideous. I smiled hugely, feeling no pain at all, and decided it was time to get myself together. There was a hairbrush on the dresser. I brushed my long tresses with more pleasure than I ever thought that simple action could produce, feeling no pain in my back or aching in my muscles. There were ribbons in the top drawer, and I used a green one to pull back some of the hair that fell into my face. The green perfectly accentuated my walnut brown eyes. Lillian's gowns were back in the closet, hanging peacefully. Glenn must have put them back after I fell asleep. I felt regret in taking one, offering a word of apology to her before choosing a hunter green dress. The bodice laced in the front, thank goodness, and I was able to dress myself completely. It was a long velvet gown with white lilies and blue morning glories embroidered along the edges. The muslin slip was light and breezy, and I felt beautiful. "Thank you, Lillian," I whispered, and opened the bedroom door to be struck full force with the homely smells of a grand breakfast being prepared. Glenn was standing in the kitchen wearing a deep blue vest, an ivory shirt, and dark brown trousers that were snug in all the right places. He wore a threadbare burlap apron as he chopped the fruit, humming to himself in a broken baritone. He turned and bade me good morning, with the cheeriest smile I had yet seen. "Good morning," I said with equal cheerfulness. I sat on the bench at the table, contentedly sipping fresh orange juice, as Glenn slid a wooden plate loaded with apple, pineapple, grapes, and pomegranate in front of me. He sat down beside me with his own plate and reached for my hand. "O God of the heavens and the morning, thank you for this food from your garden. We praise you for it and ask it to heal us and make us stronger. Amen." "Amen," I said, startled by this man of faith, but pleased, and took the first delicious bite. We ate together in amiable silence, the flavors perfectly complementary. It was surprisingly filling, and I smiled to myself as I chewed, noticing my teeth were no longer loose. Birds were serenading the forest outside, and it seemed that nothing could ever be wrong in this world. I wiggled, enjoying the feeling of ease I had now that I was unencumbered by various wounds. "How do I heal so fast?" I asked as he poured me another cup of juice. "That was the wine," he answered, grinning. "It has amazing healing properties. The rejuvenating power of the sun fills the berries, and that power grows more concentrated in the fermentation process. You do look greatly improved." "Thank you." I heaped the last of the breakfast onto my fork and plunged it into my mouth, satisfied. That was delicious. It was my pleasure. "I was wondering, though, what's the deal with the dead spring? You acted like you knew something about it, but I was too preoccupied to ask yesterday. Please, tell me what you know." He put his fork down deliberately and rested his elbows on the table, his hands coming together with the fingertips touching. He drew in a long, deep breath and looked squarely at me. "There are legends." I raised my eyebrows, prodding him to speak. "The dead spring is at the center of our world. The legends say that 1,000 ages ago a man came through the spring. He came from another world and taught our lands of war. We had lived in peace from the beginning of our world until then. But since he arrived, war has been never-ending. A prophet of that time foretold that one day the Shattered One would also emerge from the spring and bring an end to the eon of war. He raised his eyebrows back at me, implicating me in the legend. What, and you think that's me? I asked, laughing nervously. I'd buried my face in the wooden cup, draining the last of the invigorating nectar, and held it out for more. Glenn dutifully refilled it. He shifted a bit and said, "The prophecy said that the healer of our land would arrive with no name. How can it not be you?" I choked, swallowing wrong. I had no idea who I was, but the idea that someone else did 1,000 ages ago was preposterous and enticing. So, what, is that all the legend said? What am I supposed to do? I was trying to breathe normally, but rising panic was making it difficult. He shook his head. "My brother is a cleric for the Watcher of the Eastern Lands. After you fell asleep last night, I sent word to him of your arrival. He is coming today to meet you and tell us what he knows. He has been taught of these things since he was age 7. I am just a soldier, so I'm afraid I've told you everything I know on the matter." I stood and started pacing around the room that included the kitchen, living, and dining areas all in one circular space. The sun was still shining brightly outside, the birds were still singing, but I was feeling dark. I caught Glenn looking at me, but he turned away abruptly. Was this idea really so unbelievable? Yesterday, I arrived through a glorified puddle, naked and crusted. I was found by this man, an apparent elf no less, healed, and now told I was here to end a war. Shaking my head to clear the raving thoughts, I sighed, sat down at the table, and set my eyes on his, determined. I needed more information. "Glenn, I'm trying to believe you. Really, I am. I've been through so much in the past 24 hours that it strikes me as ridiculous to doubt what you're telling me." I reached for his hand, and he pulled away casually, his lips oddly flat when not smiling. "So, tell me about the wars. What caused them in the first place? Just because some guy taught people how to make war didn't mean they had to do it, right?" He stood, his chair scraping across the floorboards, and walked outside without a word. I followed, finding myself on a windy balcony, entirely made of wood, overlooking a large village close by. He motioned me into one of a pair of cushioned chairs, and we sat down. It was still bitterly cold, but the sun was shining, making it bearable. We lounged for a moment, observing everything. It was peaceful here. The bustle of the village below was satisfyingly normal. Beyond the village, in the distance, a white palace gleamed in the morning sun. Much closer, an enormous marketplace in the center of town was swirling with housewives and commerce. I heard smatterings of their conversations when the wind swept up from below, bartering and gossip all blending together. "Well," he began and paused as if unsure of what to say. "I don't know all the history, as I told you, but I do know about the war that I fought in." I nodded, encouraging him to speak as I swatted rogue hairs away from my face. Strands kept sticking to my lips and getting into my mouth. "It was 10 ages ago, in winter, when the northernmost village was plundered and set on fire. They had no warning, and nearly everyone died. A young boy fled to the Watcher, and the word was spread throughout the eastern lands that we were at war. I had recently wed, but I had to go. I am one of the 7 best archers in the world. I had to go." He looked down at his feet, which were bare despite the brisk air and long-toed. "The war lasted for 10 moon cycles, and we marched home victorious." He sat further up, craning his neck out to observe the town below. "See that house with the wind dial on the top? The one with the purple shingles?" He pointed, and I found it. "I fought in the war as a captain of the archers. She, Lillian, I left at home. She was pregnant with our child." His voice broke painfully as he spoke the word child. "I came back to find her dead, stiff and blue, lying on the kitchen floor. Beside her lay our newborn baby, dead as well, discarded like rubbish. The whole village had been attacked by the trolls of the north, and they had been merciless. They murdered my family and left them there for me to find. My son." He broke, then took a deep breath. That was our home. That's where I found her. She and... He choked and looked away from me. I wanted to stop him, to spare him from having to speak of it, and reached out to pat his knee in an effort to stop him. His hand snapped down on mine and pushed it away, rejecting my touch, but he looked at me gently. No, I need to say this. I've never spoken this to anyone. He took a few more moments to breathe deeply and wipe his eyes. I looked down at my hands. When he did speak, it was no louder than the wind, but the words flew into my ears and swirled there for a moment. My son, he breathed deeply. His name was Elenon. I never knew him. He was bursting with grief and loss. I didn't know what to do. I had no basis of knowledge for dealing with such things. I couldn't wrap his wounds as he'd done for mine. My hands wrestled on my lap, twisting around each other with the urge to act, but with no way to help. I wished there was something I could do. But these were old wounds. They needed to be cleaned out, like my back, so they could heal. But he had to do it on his own. Glenn took a sharp, inward breath and straightened himself, continuing as if we had been discussing the weather. The war centered on the idea that we stole something from the trolls. We didn't, I don't think. But they attacked us as if we had. There was a war before that between the fire sprites and the dwarves of the Central Lands. That was the last time a full-blooded dwarf ever walked in this world. Before that, the war was between the elves and the water sprites of the Western Lands, and before that, for generations, all the way back to the time of the warlord, said an unfamiliar voice. Another elf, I assumed from his pointed ears, stood near us, leaning against the railing, dressed in reds and browns, with a white band around his left arm. He was average height for a man, with salt and pepper hair, though mostly pepper except near the temples, fathomless brown eyes, and a meticulous beard speckled through with gray. He too had an attractive smile, with crinkles of good humor at the corners of his eyes. Glenn stood and helped me to my feet. This is my brother Gable, he said coldly, as Gable gave an ironic bow. At your service, Gable cooed, kissing my hand. The tickle of his beard made me giggle, much to my horror. I saw something flash across Glenn's face for a microsecond, and then his calm mask slid into place, and his eyes hardened. Yes, let's go inside, and you can regale us with your wealth of knowledge, Glenn said as he prodded Gable, who was still holding my hand and smiling like a wolf, into the treehouse. The warmth that greeted us was a delightful change from the chilly balcony. We gathered around the fire. Gable was the first to sit, plopping carelessly on the lounge. Glenn grimaced and offered me the chair that was his own favorite, pulling up a wooden stool next to me. Gable was shorter and more muscular than his tall, lean brother. Except for that distressingly charming smile they both shared, there was very little of brotherly resemblance between them. Come now, brother, Gable said, winking at me conspiratorially. We must have wine with the telling. Have you no morningberry wine? No, that is only for healing, Glenn said. I do have some regular wine, though, if you must drink before the midday meal. Gable threw his head back and laughed, a haughty and not entirely pleasant string of "ha!" stamped out with his feet to the rhythm. I could see every tooth in his mouth. I'm a cleric, not a soldier. You keep your discipline and leave me to my debauchery. What's a cleric? I asked. A priest of the highest order. I hold the knowledge of the ancient writings within me as the hand of Ambius the Wise. Oh, so can you tell me who I am then? Glenn came back with a bottle of red wine and one wooden cup. Gable scowled at the cup. Will you not allow your beautiful guests to drink as well, O master of temperance? Gable mocked. I heard a breath like a growl come from Glenn's direction and spoke up quickly. None for me, thanks. I'd rather face what you have to say sober. Gable poured himself a serving of wine up to the brim. He drank thirstily as if it was water, not wine, and then wiped his mouth with his sleeve. I supposed that was the reason for his wearing red. Well, then to the telling, Gable said, staring into the cup. My heart jumped, eager to listen, hoping to find something worthwhile in his words. I have been with Ambius for 30 ages, studying the histories and legends. The legends are carved on huge stones in ancient runes, an archaic form of dwarfish. He paused to take a long swig. So, my solemn brother informs me that you emerged from the dead spring. Tell me your story. For reasons I couldn't identify, I did not want to tell him everything. I recounted only the basest of information, ending at the part where Glenn found me. Having finished my recitation, I turned to look at Glenn, but all his attention was on Gable. He had the look of a hawk observing a mouse. Ah, Gable said, refilling his mug. Well then, I will now tell you the tale. Thus began a monologue that became more slurred as it went on. 1,000 ages ago, in the Central Lands, at a deep water well called the Dead Spring, so called for the periodic emergence of dead bodies in the water, a man emerged. In those days, a sect of dwarves revered the water and checked daily to see if it had borne anything new to the world. He was found, tended to, and kept secretly, where the ancient tablets lie in the castle of Rune, the home of the elders. They named the man Crigil Lort, the warlord, for his viciousness. He grew strong, teaching the dwarves the uses of various herbs for medicine and the art of making alcohol. Here he raised his glass and drained his second cup quickly, and just as quickly refilled it. He spoke quickly, too, as if resenting the time spent away from his cup. I interrupted him with many questions, trying to fill in the details. What I gleaned from the broken exposition spat out between sips was this. The thing of greatest importance the warlord had taught the dwarves was the art of taking metals from the earth and fashioning them into weapons. He made for himself a suit of armor and a sword, and went to speak with the king of the northern lands. He then went to the watchers of every land, dining and drinking with them, learning their weaknesses. The warlord had then taken a wife from the tribe of dwarves when he returned to the castle of Rune, a talented enchantress named Ishara. One day, a prophet of the fire sprites, Flint, ran into the castle during a great feast, jumping and shouting, mad with the words of his prophecy. The dwarves, mistaking his intent, imprisoned him and left to wage war on the land of fire. There was an elf named Orr, who was renowned in the art of wizardry, who later joined the fire sprite in the prison. Orr had come to the dwarves to study at the feet of the warlord, as had many others. When Crigil Lort and his wife disappeared, the elf wizard was blamed for the crime. No one knew what happened to the warlord and Ishara. They disappeared on the day the dwarves marched to war on the southern lands, the first battle. They were never seen again. Orr and the prophet became friends in their captivity. Flint's life extinguished in the prison, and Orr wrote down everything he could remember of the prophecy once freed and returned to the eastern lands. Which brings us to the matter at hand, Gable continued, pulling a scrolled piece of paper from his belt and handing it to me. I unrolled it and saw the most beautifully penned passage I had ever seen, written in a script that I didn't understand. Glenn, seeing my trouble, pulled it neatly from my grip and began to read with practiced diction. In the cursed age of the warlord, when he crawled from the dead spring and taught our peoples the evil things of this world, ending the peace that graced our lands since the dawn of time, this prophecy was given to Flint, the fire sprite. By the living flames of the river royal, I, Flint, did see this vision. Upon the world, darkness spreads in all direction from the very center. An evil pestilence will shake the foundations of our lands and cause the destruction of our world. Although the actions of the warlord are mighty and his plots cunning, there are many who oppose him and his schemes. The Watchers, until this time the mediators between the creatures of the lands and the Creator, will become the protectors of their own realms, each attempting to guard their own subjects from the spreading darkness. However, this shift in focus will cause the lands to continuously make war with one another, feeling in their bones the fragility of life and the coming death that is the inheritance of all. Every land will make war with the other, with no real victories, for 1,000 ages. At that time, still future, the Watchers will be alienated from one another. They will have lost the tie that bound them and will be suspicious of their ancient friends. Without the power of our Creator linking the Watchers once more, there will come, in that day, within 6 moon cycles from the anniversary of the warlord's appearance, the total destruction of our realm. The world of the elementals will vanish from creation, allowing the warlord to harness the powers thereof. This was the will of the warlord. May it not be so. Glenn paused, letting it all sink in. Gable was still guzzling wine with one eye on Glenn, listening to the reading with professional attention. I searched the flames of the fire, trying to sort out the details. At least I knew one thing for sure. I was now in the world of the elementals. Glenn lifted the scroll and continued. Just before the last warlord's day, another will rise from the dead spring. The shattered one will bear the mark of the warlord and will come to us from another world. The one will have seen the warlord's face and will understand the true nature of him, though that one will arrive with no name. The one must unite the Watchers, and in doing so, will cause the wars to cease and the connection with our Creator to be reestablished. To the inhabitants of our world, here, the shattered one must be protected. Glenn rolled up the scroll, handed it back to Gable, visibly awed by what he'd read, and slumped back onto his stool. Gable, having drained every drop from the wine bottle, pulled another sheet of paper from his belt and handed it to Glenn, who opened it with a weary look. He read it silently and leapt to his feet with anger radiating so hotly I could feel it scorch my cheeks. "No," Glenn said in a voice like steel, tossing the scroll into the fire. I lunged forward slightly, my hand outstretched to snatch it back, but it was too late. His long fingers grabbed the fabric around Gable's neck and pulled hard, lifting him from the lounge and bringing them nose to nose. I was shocked by this sudden escalation and pressed myself into the back of my chair. Gable laughed like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Oh, you would bring about the destruction of the entire world?" He stared back at his brother, completely nonchalant. "I will not surrender her to your care," Glenn said, matter of fact. "Wait, what?" I asked. "What did that paper say?" Gable reached up, pried Glenn's hands from his clothing, dropped the foot or so down to the floor, smoothed his shirt, and turned to me. "It said that under the authority of Ambius the Wise, you are hereby ordered to accompany me to him at once, there to discover what you must do." "No," Glenn said again, turning from him to me, his look changing from molten steel to kindness. His eyes held naked honesty and a silent warning. He thought Gable a danger to me, and he would not leave me alone with him. I felt a cold chill tingle down my spine. Gable didn't strike me as a good man, but I hadn't thought him dangerous. "Glenn Ellenbill," Gable said, straightening himself with a drunken wobble and sucking in wetly through his lips. "For disobedience to the Watcher of the Eastern Lands, I hereby place you under arrest." "No," I said to him, defiance rising in my throat, my body standing in objection on instinct. Glenn winked at me. "Yes." He stood with rounded shoulders, affecting defeated tones. "I have burned the words of the Watcher and must be brought before him," he explained. Then he smiled. "Which means, I believe, that you'll have to take me with you." Gable's face went an ugly shade of puce, but he nodded before stomping off to the toilet. The moment the bathroom door slammed shut, Glenn leaned in so close that I could see little flecks of gold in his blue irises. His lips brushed my ear as he whispered, "He is my brother, but I would not trust him with a house plant." "How much trouble have you gotten yourself into?" I asked. "Enough," he answered. "But I will not abandon you. I will not leave you alone," he promised. I knew he was thinking of Lillian and Elenon. I nodded as Gable swayed toward us once more. "Shall we be off?" he asked, a slight drunken lisp evident. "Come now, brother. We haven't had the midday meal yet, and you've barely drunk any wine." He clapped Gable genially on the back, which made him stumble forward a step before halting himself at the back of the chair. "Oh, I suppose we could wait until after the meal," he agreed, lustily staring at the rack where Glenn kept his bottles. "But we cannot wait for morning. We must reach Ambius before nightfall." Glenn nodded and walked to the rack. I stood staring at Gable, who burped loudly and without apology. When Glenn handed the bottle to the priest, he looked at it rapturously. "This is the really good stuff," he cried, seizing the cork between his slightly blue teeth and yanking it out cleanly. "A bargain, shall we say," Glenn replied, snatching the bottle away from him. "Oh, what about?" Gable looked annoyed, already reaching to take it back. "I will give you this, my best bottle of wine, and 3 others like it, "If you will not bind me as a prisoner," Glenn stated. Gable stared at the bottle, shifting his narrowed eyes to me for a long, uncomfortable moment, then back to the bottle. "Deal," he said, and they shook hands. That look Gable had given me had caused my legs to snap shut. I realized exactly what that admitted debaucher had planned for me on the journey. I had the distinct feeling that my safety had just been purchased for a few liters of wine. "A deal, then," Glenn said, and released Gable's sweaty hand. Wiping the residual moisture against his trousers, he turned to me with a nod and strode to the kitchen to prepare the meal. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I called after him. Gable bumped my shoulder rudely as he made his way to the lounge with his prize, plopping down like a sack of wheat. "Yes, actually. If you could chop the onions, that would be a great help." I followed him into the kitchen, where I was handed onions and a knife, and began chopping with practiced skill. I could cut an onion properly without conscious thought, but I couldn't remember the day before yesterday. I closed my eyes, frustrated, as the fumes began to make them water. I found myself transported, thrown unwillingly, into a vision. I was in a little yellow kitchen, a modern one, with a gas stove and microwave, chopping onions. Chris was beside me with a glass of white wine, talking. He leaned in to nibble my earlobe. I wiggled a bit and turned to him with the knife in hand. "Watch yourself, darlin'. I'm dangerous," I teased. He held up his hands as if I had him at gunpoint, but then wrapped them around my face and kissed me. "That's what I love about you, Alana," he said, and released me. I turned away and resumed chopping, wondering what on earth he could be talking about. I was harmless as a kitty cat. "Alana!" I exclaimed, dropping the knife on the counter and stepping back quickly. "What?" Glenn was staring at me. "My name, I just remembered. It's Alana. The onions triggered a memory." I waved vaguely in their direction. "Sit down then, Alana," he said, smiling through the syllables of my name and sitting me at the kitchen table. "I'll get you some tea." Gable, overhearing this, jumped up from the lounge. He crashed into the side table, knocked it over, and fell to the floor alongside it, clutching his precious mug of wine. Surprisingly little spilled, and he hopped up quickly as if nothing had happened. "You know your name?" he asked. "Yes," I said, raising one eyebrow at him. "Ah ha ha!" He laughed explosively, dancing. "It is you! There's no longer any doubt. You are the one we've waited for. There is power in your blood." He gleefully cheered. I watched him warily, leaning away from his excitement. "Not much of that left, actually," I remarked, leaning further back as he slapped his hands on the kitchen table and got directly in my face, studying me intensely. I could smell his foul breath. "And why are you so sure it's me now that I know my name?" "Get back, fool," Glenn said, physically removing Gable from my personal space. Gable shot him a nasty look, but obeyed, settling himself onto the bench across from me. A later prophecy said that the name of the Shattered One would be remembered on Warlord's Day. He toasted my general direction and drank deeply. He came up from his cup suddenly with a puzzled look on his wine-slackened features. "Hey, what did you mean by that?" he asked. "What?" Glenn handed me a steaming cup of tea and whispered, "The blood," before returning to chopping our lunch. "Oh," I said, sipping gingerly. "I was mostly drained of blood yesterday. I barely survived." I lifted my chin to show the nearly healed scar of the slash in my throat. If Glenn hadn't found me, I would be dead, and I suppose your whole world would have been doomed. I had meant that last remark as a joke, but was alarmed to see both brothers' faces drain of color. "Don't joke about that," Gable rebuked, before shaking the cup over his open mouth to get every last drop. "There are over 100,000 elves alone, with countless other races. We will all perish if you fail. In 6 moon cycles from today, Warlord's Day, if the Watchers are not united in purpose and reconnected to the Creator, everyone and everything will die." I looked down at my tea, shamed into silence. "What did he look like?" Gable asked, and I noticed I was getting used to his drunken non sequitur. "The Warlord? I don't know, really. I don't remember seeing any—" I stopped as the image of big red eyes flashed before me. I saw a creature. Gable leaned in, seeing my face. Glenn turned from his task and listened. I sighed and took another sip of my tea, letting the warmth battle the chill that the eyes had provoked in me. It was huge, ugly, evil beyond description, with big red eyes and a laugh that nearly stopped my heart. "Where? Where did you see it?" Gable demanded, his pleasant tenor taking on a shrill quality. I leaned away from him again, trying to put distance between us. "On my world," I answered, delighted that I actually had an answer. "How did you get here? By what spell?" Gable asked, his tone pitching lower and his eyes narrowing to slits. "I don't know. I was too busy being murdered at the time." Gable opened his mouth to prod me further, but Glenn put a hand on his shoulder and a plate of salad in front of him, dressed with what looked like thin guacamole. He served me next, then himself, and after the usual prayer, we settled to the business of chewing. Along with my thoughts, I pondered what I had learned, storing facts away for later. There was little else to occupy my mind, and I felt a pleasant sensation once I had it all sorted. What did I have to lose, anyway, going to see the Watcher? I had no home, no family, and Glenn was the only person of any value to me. I wouldn't do it for Gable's sake, that was sure. I stole a glance at him, watching him shove an enormous piece of broccoli, dripping with dressing, into his mouth. The green residue glistened in his beard as he chewed loudly with snorts like a pig at slop time. I was put off the food and pushed my plate away. It was hard for me to eat when thinking, so I excused myself and went to lie down. At least I had a name. I closed my eyes and smiled, reveling in my newly discovered identity. So much was held in a name. Then I remembered what Glenn had read from that prophecy. I was the only hope to save their world. How could that even be? All I wanted to do was find a home somewhere. Here, my world, I didn't care. I just wanted to be left alone. The last thing I wanted was to be a savior, trapped between a walking tragedy and a drunkard, pulled along a path I didn't choose. I traced the scar of the slit in my throat with my fingertips, and my heart hardened. One thing was certain. I was done being a victim. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. It really helps us out. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. You'll always find it in the description and pinned in the comments. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released. I'll release one chapter every week until the audiobook is finished.